Good morning. Good morning, everybody. It is an honor to be with you all for a Wednesday Wake Up Club breakfast. It's November 1st. It's hard to believe October is already gone. And in the words of one of the best men that I've known ever, we live in interesting times. And it's an honor to be a fill-in. As you can tell, I'm Morton's body double. We look exactly alike. It's hard to tell the difference. But just a friendly reminder for those that live in the state of Virginia and a couple other states out there that we have elections coming up. And elections these days can be decided by the narrowest of margins. And a lot of conservatives, a lot of people on our side and on our team often critique, what's the point? Why should we continue? And in Virginia, which in Northern Virginia especially can be really blue, it's an important question to answer for a lot of people. And I like to think of a movie to give people a little bit of an uplifting spirit. And the movie, for those fellow nerds out there, is The Lord of the Rings. And in The Lord of the Rings and the Two Towers, the second movie, Frodo was equally as dismayed. They couldn't get to the end. They thought that all hope was lost. And he's talking to his friend Sam. Why are we doing this? Why should we keep going? And Sam replies, because there's good in this world, and it's worth fighting for. And there is good in the state of Virginia. There is good in our Commonwealth. There are good candidates up for election, and it's our responsibility to make our voice heard. So I absolutely encourage you to vote for the candidate of your choice in this upcoming election, but hopefully you make the right choice. So I also encourage you to live tweet today's event. The hashtag is WWCB. In 2023, your Leadership Institute has already trained 22,619 conservatives at 1,508 separate programs. That compares with the 280,207 conservatives in all last year. So we're almost up to last year, which is great to see. And since 1979, LI has trained over 280,000 graduates, activists, students, and leaders. You have before you LI's schedule for the upcoming months. Please take a moment to review these schools and consider attending or sending a friend to a training. If you are watching online, visit our website at leadershipinstitute.org/training to see upcoming online and in-person training. I encourage you to take part. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce Maria Ruth Dunning for the invocation and Pledge of Allegiance. Maria is from Halifax, Virginia, and attends Virginia Tech, where she is a double major in criminology and psychology with a Spanish minor. She has been a campus reform correspondent since September of 2022. Maria is involved in organizations on campus, including Students for Life, fantastic organization, Turning Point USA, Network of Enlightened Women, and College Republicans. Outside of school, Maria enjoys writing, giving back to her community, and playing with their cat, Mink. Maria is the campus reform intern, and I would ask her to step up here.
Okay. Dear Heavenly Father, we thank you for allowing us to be here today, for keeping us safe and well to enjoy this nourishing meal together. We thank you for Mark Mix and that he's able to be here to share his wisdom with us. We thank you for Morton and the Leadership Institute and its legacy. And we thank you for every single attendee that was able to be here today. Father, please bless the people here in this room today. Bless this food so that it may nourish us and fuel us to make this world a better place. And bless the conservative movement so that we may continue to serve this country and this world in your name. Bless this nation that it may continue to hold true to what's good. Father, please watch over us so that we may continue to conserve what is good in our world. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you so much. All right, and now it's my pleasure to introduce Ron Nearing for the programs report. Ron Nearing, Director of International Programs at the Leadership Institute, is a strategist and communications expert who served as national spokesman in the 2016 presidential campaign of Senator Ted Cruz. Prior to stepping onto the national stage, Ron was elected the Republican nominee for lieutenant governor, earning the support of many conservative organizations and over 3.1 million voters in 2014. Ron led the California Republican Party as chairman from 2007 to 2011. He successfully retired the party's entire $4.7 million debt, and the party raised more than $74 million during his tenure. Upon leaving office due to term limits, the California Republican Party was left with no debt and a substantial cash reserve. Financial controls were improved and a professional staff put in place. He served as trustee for the Grossmont Union High School District in San Diego County, a large district with 11 high schools, 24,000 students at the time, and a budget in excess of $170 million. He chaired the audit committee and was a strong proponent of expanding charter schools. In 2020, San Diego County voters elected Ron to serve in a local planning capacity, winning the support of over 65% of voters in his district. I'd like to introduce Ron Nearing.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that fine obituary. It is great to be with all of you this morning. You are clearly the hardcore of the conservative movement, given what time you had to get up in order to make it here on time. So thank you very much for your presence here. It wouldn't be a Ron Nearing presentation without a PowerPoint, so I threw a couple of slides together on the plane out here from California. It's always great to be in Virginia. The moment I landed Dulles, I could feel my tax burden dropping as a resident of California, so I have a couple of days of reprieve. I wanted to update you a little bit on what we do internationally. It's a very small part of what we do at the Leadership Institute. It's under 2% of our budget, but we have a big impact in places around the world. Let me talk to you about a couple of them. The first is to put this in context, and that is that we might all think that the Reagan Revolution, and as a child of the 1980s, Ronald Reagan was central to how I grew up in politics. But the Reagan Revolution actually didn't start on January 21st, 1981, when Ronald Reagan was sworn in. It actually started 623 days earlier when Margaret Thatcher came in as the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. And she helped to set the stage, and then Reagan and Thatcher together literally helped to change the world. And so conservatism is not a uniquely American phenomenon. This is the cause of freedom is a worldwide phenomenon, and people like Reagan, Thatcher, and others have had a dramatic impact around the world. Just ask the Soviet Union in terms of the impact that they had. Let me talk about a couple of things. One is we have an ongoing program with the Conservative Party in the UK. Rishi Sunak, who's the Prime Minister, has currently a large majority that was elected under Boris Johnson in the most recent general election campaign. And we will work with the UK Conservative Party, training several thousand conservative candidates, activists, and leaders throughout the UK in the first 6 months of next year. Recently, we attended the Conservative Party conference in Manchester. If you've never had the opportunity, if you ever have the chance to attend the Conservative Party's annual conference, it is an incredible event. It blows the doors off of the Republican National Convention in terms of the number of activities and such that take place there, and they welcome international participants as well. In this photo here, we held a briefing on information warfare. And one of the benefits of having an international program is that we get to sit in the room with our counterparts from around the world and learn and see what they're experiencing and so on. And historically, the left is much better at communicating and working together internationally than conservatives are, which is why when you see the left pushing one bad idea in one country, in a blink of an eye, it shows up in another country as well, because the left institutionally works together much better across international lines than we do. I was just in Mexico last week at a wonderful event called the Foro America Libre. In this event was pulled together by the German Konrad Adenauer Foundation, which is a conservative foundation out of Germany. And they have brought together leaders from throughout Latin America to push back on this rising tide of leftist populism that you've seen grip countries like Mexico. We have a far-left leader, the most left-wing leader in Mexico in modern times, Venezuela, Cuba, the new president of Honduras, all on the far left. And there's an active effort to bring people together and then to help to train conservatives across Latin America to run more effective campaigns so we can push back against that rising tide coming from the left. Let me take you across the pond to Moldova, a country that you probably haven't heard a great deal about, but Moldova is a former Soviet socialist republic. And they want to integrate with the West. It's one of the poorest countries in Europe. Moldova was actually carved out of Romania. Stalin kind of grabbed it in the closing days of World War II. And part of the problem is that the Russians never left. In the shaded area on the map is an area called Transnistria, which continues to be occupied by Russian forces, which never left the country. And this woman here, who you see on the right, is President Maya Sandu. She is the Iron Lady of Eastern Europe. She's about this tall, but she is standing up to Putin in ways that would put others to shame. And she's being incredibly tough in terms of wanting to push her country to integrate with the West, to be democratic and not to be in Putin's orbit. We were there in Moldova earlier this year conducting a training for the youth wing of her party. Now let me close just with a couple of comments on a country that's been in the news a great deal, obviously, since the Hamas began its war against Israel in the current phase on October 7th. When I came into this role 9 years ago at the Leadership Institute, we had never done any training at all in Israel. Now we've held more than 15 programs in Israel. We've trained over 566 Israeli conservatives, and I'll tell you why. In the words of one of our local organizers in Israel, who explained to us, if you're involved in Israeli politics, there's no shortage of trainings and conferences and confabs and opportunities, so long as you're on the Israeli left. If you're on the Israeli left, there's plenty of those opportunities. They're all funded by the EU or the UN or whoever, because all of those institutions believe that the pathway to peace forward is through the Israeli left. But if you're a conservative in Israel, there was nothing for you. And so we held our International School of Fundraising in Jerusalem this past summer. It was the biggest one ever. We filled the room. 150 conservatives from throughout Israel attended. We brought all of our faculty there as well as members of our staff and so on. And so we held the most successful International School of Fundraising in the history of Leadership Institute in Jerusalem last year. We have so many alums now in Israel that we were going to launch the Leadership Institute Network in Israel. That was going to launch on January 30th. That's going to have to be delayed because of the current conflict. But we will launch that about between 90 and 180 days after Hamas is crushed in this current conflict. We will be back. And we made part of the reason why we held the program there. Number one, we had a large base of local Israeli conservatives who we could train. But in addition to that, we wanted to make clear that it's okay to go to Israel to hold an event. It's okay to say no to the BDS movement and other radical forces out there that are constantly trying to diminish or isolate Israel. And so we wanted to send a signal, and that's why we held the program there. It turned out to be a tremendous success. So I want to thank everyone, all of my colleagues here at LI who made that happen. You can reach me here at the Leadership Institute if there's anything I can provide for you. And until then, we're going to continue to work to defeat socialists, communists, and vegetarians around the world. Thank you very much.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Ron. Some fantastic work being done across the globe in the fight for conservatism. Now it's my honor to introduce Greg Salovek to introduce our speaker. And Greg is from Brewster, New York, and is a recent graduate of Mercy College in Dobbs Ferry, New York. He received his Bachelor of Science in Legal Studies. Active on campus, Greg established a Turning Point USA chapter. He also participated in a Model United Nations at Mercy College and debate club at the College of St. Rose. As a member of the new generation of conservative advocates, Greg hopes to fight for the principles that make America the greatest country in the world. Outside his studies, Greg serves as a firefighter for the Brewster Volunteer Fire Department. He enjoys fishing in his spare time and plans on going to law school one day and aspires to work in Washington, D.C. as a lawyer. And Greg is our political and fundraising training intern at the Leadership Institute and will introduce our speaker. Greg?
Good morning, everyone. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker this morning, Mr. Mark Mix. Mark Mix is president of the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation. He serves as president of the National Right to Work Committee, a 2.8 million member public policy organization. He became president of the foundation in 2003. Under the leadership of Mr. Mix, the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation has continued to provide unparalleled free legal access to workers and has utilized cutting-edge legal strategies to protect workers from the abuses of compulsory unionism. Mr. Mix frequently appears on national television shows including Fox News Channel's Your World with Neil Cavuto, Glenn Beck, and Fox and Friends, and has also appeared multiple times on CNBC and CNN. Mr. Mix often serves as a guest on nationally syndicated radio shows such as The Lars Larson Show, Jason Lewis Show, Michael Reagan Show, and The Jim Bohannon Show. Similarly, Mr. Mix's writings have appeared in national outlets such as The Wall Street Journal, Washington Times, Investors Business Daily, Washington Examiner, and National Review. His pieces have also been featured in widely read regional publications across the country, including the Detroit Free Press, the Orange County Register, and the Detroit News. Mr. Mix is also a sought-after speaker on political technology and grassroots lobbying tactics. He often serves across the country, speaking and training participants in the political process. Mr. Mix holds a BA in finance from James Madison University and an associate degree in marketing from the State University of New York. Prior to joining the National Right to Work Committee in 1990, Mr. Mix worked for several state-level right to work groups. He joined the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation in 1999. Mr. Mix and his amazing wife, Diana, reside in Fairfax, Virginia, and have 6 children. Everyone, when you have questions at the end, please wait until you're given a microphone to ask your question. And everybody, please give a warm welcome to Mr. Mark Mix.
Here. This is why I don't use a podium. You can see podiums scare me. Look at these guys. So I'm going to stand out front if you don't mind. Cameraman, I'm going to walk around a little bit. I'm going to make you earn your pay today. All right? So thank you, Greg. I appreciate the opportunity to be here with Leadership Institute. I am a Leadership Institute graduate, first and foremost. In fact, I got my job through the Leadership Institute. If it hadn't have been for a young leadership trained person on the college campus at James Madison University in 1985, I wouldn't be here today. Someone was standing in front of the table, shaking hands and introducing themselves and inviting someone to a meeting. I was at a college campus where I knew no one, literally knew no one, and this first handshake from a Leadership Institute graduate, YLS graduate, was the beginning of what you just heard about, and as Ron said, my obituary. But it has been a privilege to be part of Leadership Institute. I see the house parents here talking to the interns and a new crop of interns. Is Allie here? Because I think I haven't been invited to this new intern group. I don't know if I've been fired or not. Did you guys recommend I be fired? Okay, all right. Well, anyway, I had a nice chat with Cooper today, so that was good. Right to work, obviously an important issue. Let's start out with a story that has a happy ending, because happy endings aren't something that we're recognizing right now in the United States of America, particularly here in Washington, D.C. Imagine, if you will, you were fired from your job for posting your political views on your private Facebook page. Then imagine that when you raise the issue with someone who takes your money as a condition of your employment, that person goes to your employer and says they're being harassed and that you need to be fired. This is the story of Charlene Carter, a 20-year Southwest Airlines employee who loved her job. She didn't have one single blemish in her employment file. She'd been an absolute perfect worker on the airplanes, working for Herb Kelleher in those early days of when Southwest Airlines was fun. Ron, you know it's not fun to be on any plane anymore, anytime, but Southwest Airlines was fun at one time. Well, Charlene is a deeply Christian conservative with very strong views on lots of important issues that are near and dear to her heart. When she found out that her union, the Transportation Workers Union, Local 556, that represents all of the Southwest employees across the system, was coming to Washington for the political march of the Women's March here with the the pink hats on and the other accoutrements of political discourse, she sent a note to her union president saying, "How dare you spend my money on that?" And that started a dialogue between her and the union president on a private Facebook channel that ended up with the union president going to Southwest Airlines saying that Charlene was harassing her and she had to be fired. Southwest Airlines complied with that request. They found a picture of Charlene 4 years previous to this event where she was traveling as a tourist, but she had her Southwest Airline badge on so she could access the employee line instead of going through the TSA line. And any way you can get around the TS line, you need to take advantage of that. But they found this picture and said you were representing the airline there, and that picture was on your personal page, so that was the condition upon which he was fired. That was the predicate. And then they said you can't treat the union boss this way. Now, suffice to say, nothing in this dialogue between the union official and Charlene had anything to do with her workplace. Nothing to do with the terms and conditions of her employment, nothing to do with how work was performed or how she was doing her work. It was a private conversation between her and a union official that she never voted for, didn't want, and didn't ask for. And so when Charlene finally sent the final email to her saying, "I'm going to support your recall as the union president," that's when the fireworks started and Charlene was fired. That started 6 years ago, that process. Charlene came to the National Right to Work Legal Defense Foundation for representation. And we were glad to provide legal representation to her, which is now about a $3 million lawsuit on her behalf. But in July of last year, this case went in front of a jury trial in the fifth district of Dallas, this 5th District Court in Dallas. And a jury awarded Charlene $5.1 million in punitive and compensatory damages for this violation of her rights. Yeah, you can applaud for that. That's right. The case probably could have been settled by Southwest about 5 years ago for a limited amount of money, but no, they stuck with it. And they were going to defend the union official, and they were going to attack Charlene for her views and stating her views about her personal political views. In fact, in Discover, we found that the unions and the HR department were harassing her, saying she wouldn't believe all the campaigns she supported over the last 17 years. If we could tell her, her head would explode. And that, yeah, she doesn't know. We're glad to say that we're using her money for political campaigns and causes she doesn't like. Those are paraphrases of exact quotes that came out or quotes that came out during Discovery. So Charlene's back on the job. She got her job back. She's back in the air. She's been flying for probably 4 or 5 months now. She's getting whispers from her co-workers saying, "Hey, thanks for doing what you're doing, standing up for what you believe." But of course, the union's appealing the case and the Southwest Airlines appealing the case. We're now 6 years into the case. We've had lots of action. But the bottom line is she got her job back. But believe it or not, Charlene still has to pay union fees to the union that had her fired as a condition of her flying on Southwest Airlines. Now, we think, we've litigated on the public sector stuff and the government sector stuff. Charlene's covered by the Railway Labor Act. So even though she's working in a right-to-work state of Texas, that right-to-work law does not protect her from being forced to pay dues or fees to a union as a condition of keeping her job. And that's what right-to-work's all about. It's a really simple concept. We believe that every worker should have the right to join a union. Every worker should have the right to associate with a union. In fact, every worker should have the right to give their entire paycheck to a union if they choose to do so. But no one should be compelled as a condition of employment to join and financially support a private organization. We believe that workers should have an individual voice. Unfortunately, labor policy going back to the 1930s says that I can make Ron associate with me, as a condition of his employment, Stephen and I can vote for Ron's political and employment life simply because the two of us have voted to have him in our collective. That's the wrong policy. It's a violation of the First Amendment from an associational standpoint, from a speech standpoint, but there's lots of work to do. And unfortunately, that work comes here in Washington, D.C. Because Joe Biden, on the campaign trail prior to his election, said he was going to be the most pro-union president in American history. And I will say this about that. He's not pro-union, he's pro-union boss. He's pro-forced unionism. He's not pro-worker. He's not pro-rank-and-file union member. And you can see that across the nation. You know, when you have a president who, when he's campaigning, says, I'm going to shut down the Keystone Pipeline, which was a project labor agreement, meaning you could only be on the job if you had a union card in your wallet. You could only bid on the job if you were part of a union contract. And so when he said he's going to put them out of business, he put 10,000 construction workers on the unemployment line in the first week of administration. That's not helping rank-and-file workers. That's helping union bosses with their radical agenda that goes beyond the American workplace. And that's why right to work is so important, and that's why it's such a simple cause and something that 8 out of 10 Americans believe workers shouldn't be compelled to pay dues or fees to a union as a condition of getting a job or keeping their job. And of course, I think most of the people here believe that too. But that's the one thing that union officials can't brook. And when you think about union activity and the strikes, the big 3 strikes, and the UPS threatened strike, and the Kaiser Permanente strike, and the casino workers strike, and the healthcare workers strikes, and now CVS and Walgreens strike that we're going to be looking at over the next couple days, we see this dramatic increase in union activity. Well, the reason is clear why that is happening right now. Because the Biden administration, whether it be Joe Biden or someone else, you can draw your own opinions about who that is, but the bottom line is this: they have an all-government approach on empowering union officials over rank-and-file workers and over the general public. This is probably the most aggressive union campaign we've seen since watching things in California. With Gavin Newsom and Julie Su and the things they've done there. You know, California is generally a model for America. Well, it's a model for Joe Biden because anything they can do to empower union officials in the state of California is now happening in spades here in the United States. And it's an all-hands-on-deck approach by the government. The Department of Labor, the National Labor Relations Board, the Department of Energy, the Department of Justice, the Health and Human Services Division, the White House, or the Wage and Hour Division at the Department of Labor. All of them are on deck fighting to expand union power while they have the opportunity to do that. And it's been something that's been extraordinary. Of course, their first objective, and Joe Biden made this clear when he was elected president, that he said this, quote, there should be no right to work in America. Not a joke, not a joke. Now think about what he said. There should be no right to work in America. Do you believe there should be no right to work in America? He thinks of it as the idea of allowing union officials to force workers to pay dues or fees to get or keep their jobs. And that's what this right to work fight's all about, and what they're ultimately after is giving union officials the ultimate power to force workers to pay them for the privilege of working in America. You know, we go back to the 1900s, the early 1900s, 1920, and I go back to Samuel Gompers, the founder of the American labor movement, called the father of labor unions. In his final speech in El Paso, Texas in 1924, he stood up in front of the delegates of the AFL and said, the workers of America adhere to voluntary institutions. If you will try to force them, you will destroy which inherently is stronger as a voluntary organization. And the reason why Gompers gave that speech, his final speech, was because he understood that the delegates of the AFL were going to start going to government for special privileges. And interestingly enough, in 1926, they did. They got what is known as the Railway Labor Act passed, which allowed them to unionize railroad employees across the country. And that led to the Roosevelt administration and the 1930s, when the federal government took over private sector labor management relations for the entire country. And the one principle that's underlying there is that union officials would have the power to compel Ron to associate with them, even though he never asked for, never voted for, never wanted the union. And then, to add insult to injury, if Stephen's part of that, we're going to force him to pay dues and fees to the union, to a private organization, for forced association and to get his job. That's the labor policy of the United States today. And any way they can expand that, they're going to try to do it. But what Gompers said back in 1924 is right today. They are a ward of government action. There's no question about that. It used to be that union officials would attract adherents, people that believed in it. And Ron talked about England. I mean, if you look at the labor movement and Labor Party in England, this was something that was like generational. People were in unions. Your dad was in the union. You were in the union. And the unions were organized as organizations that, did things for people. They were interested in people that supported the union and supported the idea. And truth be told, there are those people in the United States of America today that are adherents of labor unions. But the majority, I think, of union members, and because of our experience at the foundation representing literally hundreds of thousands of employees like Charlene, day in and day out, they're after bodies. They're after bodies. They don't care if you support them or not. They just want you in, and they want your money. And a right-to-work law is the one thing that threatens that revenue stream. I mean, union density in right-to-work states is half of what it is in forced unionism states for a very simple reason. Do we have any economic majors in here? Any finance majors? Okay, good. So if you're guaranteed a stream of revenue, would you be more inclined to go there where a guaranteed stream of revenue was there for you, or one where you had to work for it? You'd like the guarantee, wouldn't you? Yeah, we all would. We'd like the guarantee. So in a right-to-work state, the question of union security, which is the idea that the union will be secure because you will take money out of their paycheck and forward it to the union, is not compulsory. They can't force it. They can't compel it. And so it doesn't end up in a contract in a right-to-work state. So if you're organizing a union and your goal is for union revenue, you go to a state like California where the moment you get certified as a union representative, you put the union security clause in the contract, and every worker in that bargaining unit, whether they voted for you or not, has to pay dues or fees in order to keep their job. That's outrageous, but that's the law. And that's why the Right-to-Work Committee continues to work to pass what is known as the National Right-to-Work Law. This imposition of federal power over the workplaces in America, imposing forced unionism on the states, was only interrupted by the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, which said states could pass right-to-work laws, meaning if they could, by affirmative vote, outlaw the closed shop or the agency shop, the idea that you had to pay, that Ron had to pay me in order to work, we could outlaw that by an affirmative vote. 27 states have done that. 26 states will have it come the beginning of the year because Michigan, Governor Whitmer and the Democrat Senate, Democrat House repealed the right-to-work law back in March of this year. And so it will go out in January, most likely January or February. And the next paycheck for those workers in Michigan will include a new deduction for union dues and fees, something they hadn't been paying for over a decade because of the passage of the right-to-work law. We'll go back, we'll get it back, we'll fight back and get it back, but it's something we continue to have to struggle to do and protect those workers. So they're after bodies, they're after revenue, and what do they do with the revenue? Well, I know Ron can talk a little bit about it because in California they boast about how they can elect their own bosses. And you go to Sacramento and you listen to a committee hearing, you'll always see a purple t-shirt from the SEIU at that hearing watching for, kind of a thumbs up or a thumbs down on what the legislature in California does. Their compulsory dues power translates into about $25 billion a year in revenue. That's $1 billion. I know that doesn't sound like much these days. Those are rounding errors for the federal government. Or they're not even rounding errors anymore. Shoot, it's pocket change. Here's $25 billion. Ron, take that. Go build your international program, right? But anyway, so that money translates into politics. And we know, based on just the most rudimentary investigation of union spending, that they spend almost $2 billion every 2 years directly on politics. And this is something I think if you use a decision by the U.S. Supreme Court back in 2018, a case we litigated called Janus v. AFSCME, where we freed every government employee from being forced to pay dues or fees as a condition of getting or keeping a job. This freed every government worker in California, in Maine, any state. No government employee anywhere in America can be forced to pay dues or fees to work for their government because the Supreme Court said that everything that government unions do is political. Everything. Because they're redressing government. They're sitting there saying, this is how government should be run. These are the conditions that government should operate under. This is how the employees should be handled. This is how we should negotiate with employees. So they said that everything that government unions do is political. If we take that part of it and put that into the equation, the union expenditures on politics and lobbying goes to about $12 billion every 2 years. $12 billion. Now, we've heard a lot about Soros, we've heard a lot about the Kochs, and we've heard a lot about the, Zuckerberg, is that the guy's name, and all the Zuckbucks and all this money that's out there. The dark money is all on their side, frankly, when you look at it. But we hear about all this money. They are pikers compared to organized labor. And that power, that government-granted power back in the 1930s, and still in existence today, to allow them to force you to pay money to them in order to work, is the reason for their political power. Now, I would suggest that it's a losing proposition, just like Gompers. I believe this. They are wards of the government. Their power is not in attracting workers. Their power is in attracting politicians who will give them more power over workers. It was the Nobel laureate economist F.A. Hayek who said, the primary power that unions have over employers is a derivative of the power they have over their employees. So if you force the employees into the union and you control the employees through the conditions of employment, you basically control the employer and how they conduct their business. And we're seeing that in spades. I talked about this all hands on deck government program, all the agencies. Let me talk about the NLRB real quickly because this is an important part of what's happening right now. The National Labor Relations Board is a 5-member board nominated by the President, confirmed by the Senate, and they basically make labor policy for private sector workers across the country. Jennifer Abruzzo is the current general counsel of the National Labor Relations Board. She's a former Communication Workers of America Associate General Counsel. He appointed 2 former union officials that had longtime union lawyers in the position of the board, and they have been making the most radical decisions we've seen since the formation of the board back in 1935. I mean, this has been an absolute attack on individual freedom and the employer ability to operate their business. Let me just start out with one case called CEMEX. CEMEX, C-E-M-E-X, was a case decided on August 25th of this year. And this was a case on behalf of a company who was charged with unfair labor practice charges and for other things that they were doing. It went to an administrative law judge, and then it went to the NLRB. And they ruled through a judicial process that you could unionize workers without a secret ballot election. Now, let's talk about that for a minute. Secret ballot election is the way we elect our representatives. So we get to go in some anonymous form, whether it be on a little sheet of paper or behind a curtain or whatever, and we get to click the button, and no one is supposed to know how we vote. Well, that's the primary reason, that's the primary rationale for certification of union in the statute, saying that secret ballot elections should be the primary test. The Supreme Court's upheld that again and again and again. But secret ballots are not favorable to unions and union officials, because when you get behind the curtain, you may say one thing outside, yeah, Ron, I love you, I'm going to vote for you. You know, it's like when we have leadership votes on Capitol Hill, like we've gone through the last couple of years. I mean, there are 222 Republicans, but each candidate running for leadership can tell you they've got 180 votes each, commitments. You know, they all tell you, but when they get behind the curtain and vote, that's when the truth is told. Well, unions can't brook that anymore, so they've got to use what's called card check. Card check is a mechanism where if I can convince Ron, I'm not going to convince Ron and Steven to do this, but if I can convince my friend over here to sign a card, and 3 of my buddies can come over and on our front porch at 10 o'clock at night and say, hey, this card says you're going to get more pay, would you sign it? She says, sure, I'll sign it. Well, the moment that they get 50% plus one of those cards signed by whatever mechanism, the NLRB says they should recognize the union immediately. No vote. Nothing. Just the cards will designate that the union has a majority. So the CEMEX case went even farther. It said, not only are we going to allow the card check to be the primary mechanism for union certification, but if there is an allegation that the company has done anything to basically try to avoid unionization, that the NLRB can order a union certification without a vote and without any proof that those cards are valid. We had a case at Volkswagen back in 2017. Remember the Volkswagen plant that came to Chattanooga? They built the Passat there, I think. Well, the union went into the Volkswagen management down in Chattanooga and said, we have a majority of your workers. Here's the cards. And the North American management, good for them, said, we're not sure. The European management said, yeah, go ahead, because that's European labor policy, as Ron knows. They said, go ahead and, yeah, we'll unionize. Everybody's unionized here. Why isn't everyone unionized? And so the North American management fought it. Workers from Chattanooga contacted the foundation. We ended up representing workers at the Volkswagen plant. And we actually got to the point where we were allowed to have a secret ballot election. And the reason why we got a secret ballot, because we found out that these cards that I got signed from my young friend here, were a gift and they got amusement park tickets as a payback for it. There was quid pro quos, and some of them were 2 years old or 3 years old. They didn't have a shelf life. And so we proved that those cards weren't valid, and so we had a secret ballot election. And of course, once they went behind the curtain, they voted against unionization. Not once, but twice at the Volkswagen plant, despite the fact that union officials saying we have a majority of workers. So under this CEMEX decision, not only are they going to use card check, they're going to say if the company has done anything, even the slightest allegation of doing something wrong, the NLRB will impose the unionism without any certification of whether the cards were valid, whether the ULP was even valid, or the unfair labor practice charge, excuse me for using jargon. whether there was any validity of that. They're just going to impose the union on those workers. This is a scary, scary, scary thing. And then when you take that agenda, that we're going to be the most pro-forced unionism, most pro-forced union boss agenda in American history, and you apply it across the government, where the Department of Energy says, if you want to be part of the electric, what would we call it, phenomena, the electric vehicle phenomena, where we're building electric buses, you have to prove that you are allowing unions to organize your companies. In fact, there was a Bluebird bus company in Georgia. It was a big story. The union said, we won our first big union victory in a right-to-work state in Georgia for an electric bus company. And it turns out that there was about $1 billion in government incentives that said, you will get the contract, but you got to have a union contract in order to get the money. So they're using your taxpayer money to basically attract bodies, not adherents, bodies. And so when you build a mechanism like that, when you build a mechanism that's built on force and coercion and compulsion, and unfortunately violence as well, we haven't seen a whole lot of violence, but believe it or not, to go back into union special privileges, there's a Supreme Court case in 1973 called Edmonds, E-N-M-O-N-S, Edmonds, that says that union officials can't be prosecuted for acts of violence that are used to achieve legitimate union objectives. Whoa, yeah, that should get a woo. That should get a wow. It's true. And then 11 other states have laws on the books that say the police can't start to enforce the law unless the governor or an elected official says that they can do that. So the special privileges for unions, not only violence, the ability to force workers to associate with them, the ability to force workers to pay them as a condition of getting to keep a job, the idea that they've got a government for the next year and a half, maybe hopefully, we'll see that it doesn't last another 4 years, that is basically putting their thumb on the scale of government action using government money to expand the power of organized labor, is something we all ought to be thinking about. When we think about the left, the regressive left, I call them regressive because they're not progressive. They're not progressing anywhere. They're regressing back to a feudal system where this overlord tells us what to do, when to do it, how to do it, and why we're going to have to do it. And that why is simply because we told you so. That's where we're going with union power and union movements. Again, despite all of the major media talking about how unbelievable the union movement is and how great it is and how unbelievably broad-based it is, they use Amazon and Starbucks as an example. How many union elections do you think the unions have won at an Amazon facility in the country? One. They've won one. How many Starbucks stores are there in America? Does anyone know? Any idea? Take a wild guess, because a couple thousand? 8,000. Yeah, 8,000. How about 16,500 Starbucks stores in the United States? There are 9,500. There are 9,500 stores that are owned by Starbucks and kind of company stores. Now, when you follow the news, you know that Starbucks is the central organizing facility of organized labor. How many elections do you think Starbucks unions has won at those 16,500 Starbucks facilities? About 350. I mean, that sounds like a lot, but when you think about, Ron, you're going to have to help me. I'm a government graduate, so 350 of 16,000 is what? 2%? 1%?
Very little.
Very little. Okay, good. Very little. That's a great answer. Good government school answer right there. Very little. So notwithstanding the rhetoric surrounding these drives, and if these workers truly want to be involved in the union, they should do that. But you know what else we found out about the Starbucks unionization drive? By the way, they've lost 74. They've withdrawn from 40. So that's what, 114, which is another maybe 1%. So I'm looking at you. I'm looking at you, Ron. I know you're an international guy. So, obviously you have to have more wisdom than all of us, these domestic folks. But anyway, so you look at this and you look at Starbucks. We found out that the Service Employees International Union, the SEIU, invested $2.5 million hiring young people. This is kind of like the Leadership Institute, bringing in interns and paying them and training them to be union organizers. So they train them and then they send them out surreptitiously to a Starbucks unit in Buffalo, New York, and they say, we're going to pay you $50,000 to be a union agent, but we want you to get a job at Starbucks, and they're going to pay you whatever they pay you by the hour, but your job is going to be to organize a union. This is called salting. For anyone who likes a salt shaker, that's called salting. You add it to the food, and it changes the food, changes the taste of the food. These salts went out to these first Starbucks units, and they basically got a job, represented themselves as someone who wanted a job at the place, organized the union, got the union certified, and then moved on to the next unit. We've got 9 units now. I think we're trying to come to us, the foundation, try to decertify the union, because They looked around a year later and said, where did Ron go? Ron was the guy that wanted this union, and they look around and Ron's not there anymore. He's over in Manhattan organizing another unit. He's a SALT. And so they're saying, well, this wasn't what we signed up for, and they're trying to get out. And you may understand this, and it may be obvious. It's really easy to get into a union. It's extremely hard to get out. What do they call that? That's like the mouse trap or the roach trap or the roach hotel. It's easy to get in. It's hard to get out. And that's the way the labor law is written for individual workers across the country. It's outrageous, the balance. Our federal policy says that workers should have the right to join, the right to associate, the right to mutual aid and benefit. And then it also says they should have the right to refrain. And that right to refrain has been lost on government because they understand that the power that they wield is a direct result of government action and government support for compulsory unionism, which provides the money they need to support their political campaigns. I mean, Joe Biden is relying on union bosses for their money. He's not relying on the Keystone Pipeline rank and file workers who are on the unemployment line, even though they pay money to the union that the union spends on Joe Biden's campaign. That happens across America in unions all across the country, and it's an injustice. We believe in voluntarism, just like Samuel Gompers. We believe that every worker should have the right to choose and join, as I've said, but no worker should be compelled. We'll continue to fight for a right to work at the state level. We'll continue to fight for the right to work law that's currently pending in the United States Congress. Rand Paul is the sponsor of the bill in the Senate. Joe Wilson from South Carolina, the sponsor of the bill in the House. This is a new federal law. Shake your head and groan. Good. But it's not really a new federal law. It's a one-page bill, juxtapositions against 2,800 pages that we have to pass in order to understand what's in it. It's a one-page bill that doesn't add a single word to federal law. It simply goes into that old law from the 1930s, and it basically strips out the areas of that law that allow for unions to have this compulsion and coercion. So we can actually take words out of the federal law by giving freedom to the American worker and their ability to choose. I would encourage you to follow us the Right to Work movement. We've got a website if you're a worker and need help, or if you know a worker who needs help, who's fighting against union coercion and compulsion. You can go to the Right to Work Foundation at www.nrtw.org, and you can talk to a lawyer. We have 20 staff attorneys that do nothing but provide individual legal representation to workers across the country. Any given time, we have anywhere from probably 200 to 250 cases on behalf of workers, whether they be class actions or individual cases. We're willing to help. If you're interested in legislation, if you're interested in seeing the Right to Work law and seeing if your congressman is a co-sponsor, I think we have 143 co-sponsors on our bill now and growing. And if you want to see if they support the Right to Work Act, you can find that on the committee's website at www.nrtwc.org, and you can find out information about any legislation that's going on in your state, whether it be Virginia or California or Maine or New Hampshire or Washington, wherever it is. You can find out what we're tracking, that legislation that would either expand individual freedom or, again, force more workers into unions. It's been my privilege to be at Right to Work for 36 years. I know that I don't look that old. I look really good for 80, right? Yeah, good. I don't look so good for whatever I am. But anyway, I will say this, as I mentioned at the outset. I owe my career to a young man who shook my hand in front of a table, and if it weren't for the Leadership Institute today, I wouldn't be here, and I wouldn't have the privilege of talking with you about something that's become my passion and something that's become kind of what I've dedicated my life to, and lots of other Americans have too, in standing up for individual freedom and liberty in the American workplace. Thank you for the opportunity. Okay, we got a question. Here they come. Okay. Let's wait for the mic so we can get you on.
Hi. I have to talk fast because I'm from a union family. In our local elections, we've had the police union versus the teachers union. The police union representing, and then they won, and the Republicans were all happy. Is there any danger of having one family run both sides of the election? Is there Chinese money in unions? In our district, goes to the free speech issue. If we had a teacher who put something very inappropriate about parents who voted for Trump. on the Facebook, her thing. It got out, and that when you're dealing with children, should there be limits on free speech in terms of the power?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's a great question. I think the Supreme Court had a case yesterday. They argued a case yesterday about that very issue, I think. So there's two cases, First Amendment cases that are up there at the Supreme Court. The one was argued yesterday or the day before. What's today? Is today Wednesday? Today's Wednesday. This is the Wednesday meeting. Yeah, okay, good. So I think it was Monday that they argued the case. One deals with a personal Facebook page and the other deals with an issue like you're talking about. So I will hold off my opinion on that case until the Supreme Court rules because, what is it that Jean-Pierre Corinne or whatever always says, I can't comment on that now, it's pending litigation. So yeah, that gives me a way out of not talking about it. The idea of the police union and the teachers union, that's a really interesting dichotomy there because you do see this. It was the teachers unions, not the teachers, but the teacher unions like Randy Weingarten and Becky Pringle. Becky Pringle, the NEA, National Education Association, Randy Weingarten, the American Federation of Teachers, AFL-CIO. Their rhetoric is so far out of the ordinary for anything about education. They talk about defunding the police, and they talk about citizenship for immigrants before they'll go back to work. They talk about all these radical things that have nothing to do with education. And one of the things we're seeing is that conflict between police unions and teachers unions. Unfortunately, in Virginia, we're going to be a whole lot more of that, of the unions being involved in politics and being involved in the direction of government. In 1993, a legislative program that we ran out of the National Right to Work Committee with help from, obviously, legislators in Richmond, we passed a statute that said the state of Virginia will not negotiate with unions over terms and conditions of employment. We had a statutory prohibition against the union interfering with government action. They could obviously join together in the union. They could go to Richmond. They could protest. They could lobby, just like any ordinary citizen would do. Well, when the Democrats took the House, the Senate, and the governorship, they passed a bill that allowed union bargaining. So now Arlington County, Fairfax County, Prince William County, Loudoun County, Richmond, Virginia Beach now have unions that are controlling the rhetoric. I think one of the things that's going to come out of that is an ongoing pressure between the police union and the teachers union because they don't like police officers. We like someone who will enforce crime. We hope, if everything goes well next Tuesday, that we will be able to reinstate that statutory prohibition against bargaining. We won't stop them from playing politics. We shouldn't do that. If people want to join voluntarily and use their money to support candidates, have at it. We don't oppose that. But the idea that we're seeing kind of the fight, I mean, if you're working for the Operating Engineers Union and you're running a Caterpillar D5 bulldozer or a land scraper, and your union's endorsing Joe Biden, using your money to support him politically, you're going to say something about that. And the distance between rank and file workers, their views on America and what it should be like, and union officials is growing wider and wider and wider all the time. And that's where things are going to break down, and we're going to end up winning because they want bodies, not adherents. And you don't get adherents by putting your members on the unemployment line. You don't get adherents if you're Sean O'Brien and say that Yellow Freight should go bankrupt and 22,000 Teamster jobs should just disappear. I mean, literally, he put up a meme of a gravestone with Yellow Freight's birth date and death, and they represented 22,000 Teamsters, that company, and now they don't have jobs. So we got to continue to recognize the distance, and we got to capitalize on the fact that rank and file workers, believe that America should, protect the Second Amendment, reduce the size of government, secure the border, those types of things that allowed Donald Trump to be president of the United States in 2016, and show the dichotomy between union officials and rank and file workers. We should never say labor when we mean just ordinary workers. We should never say labor when we mean labor official. And we should never say labor official when we mean union boss. And we should never say union boss when we mean union thug. We have to be very careful how we speak about this because most rank and file workers are like us. They believe similar things that we believe. It's their leadership that's the problem. Leadership, I'll use my finger quotes. So we got to continue to watch that, and it'll be interesting to see how the teachers unions and the police unions continue to fight down the road as this process grows. Okay, next question. There's got to be one. Okay, we got one right there. There you go, sir. Thank you.
How amenable is your organization to assaulting the labor movement with people who will run for union leadership positions and actually represent the rank and file to turn things around? Or, if not your organization, perhaps facilitating another organization or standing one up which would do so?
Yeah. That's an interesting question. The question was how interested we would be in using the salting techniques to infiltrate the union membership. Well, I guess, if someone wanted to do that, it's kind of a dangerous proposition because it comes with, I don't know if you'd want to infiltrate the Teamsters leadership and, try to get elected to the Teamsters post and then all of a sudden reveal yourself as a union sultan that you're going to take the union down. I don't know what happens to somebody that does that. That's a serious question. Whether we would be involved in that or not, I don't think necessarily we would. Our job is to continue to convince Americans, American politicians, American rank-and-file workers, and American citizens that forced unionism is wrong. And, I think union officials will understand that at some point, just like Gompers did. He understood it, that if they're going to rely on government power, they're going to have to play politics, and that's why they do. The idea of salting, that kind of whataboutism that we talk about, they did it, so we should do it. There's a moral code there somewhere that should be impermeable when it comes to how we operate. I know it's hard because when we think about all the things they do and say, the solution is to do it ourselves, there are some places where I guess that makes sense, other places where it may not. And I mean, if some of our folks that support us want to infiltrate the unions, they try, and the union finds out about it and they get punished. You can be fined. For example, we represent employees that have been fined for crossing a picket line up to $40,000 by internal union kangaroo courts. And so it's a dangerous proposition, but something that maybe someone wants to do that. And I know that we've had lots of people that have come to us that have tried that route, tried to get elected to a union position to reform the union from the inside. In fact, Charlene Carter, our Southwest employee, tried to do that originally, and it just didn't work. And she realized it wasn't going to work because of the nature and the structure of the union. So we'll think about it. Let's talk privately about it. Maybe you want to be one. Okay, all right. Yeah, one more, Stephen? One more.
You use the word leadership as in union leadership, and I mean leadership means to guide or get a bunch of people to move in a particular direction. Wouldn't a term more like slave driver or something equivalent be the appropriate term to use consistently? Because that is the meme that you're trying to push, and you ought to use the words to push it.
Yeah, absolutely. I tried to use my finger quotes the last time I said leadership. I don't know. Let's look at the tape. Let's review it. But anyway, no, you're right. I mean, words matter, and how we frame issues matter. Really, that's really important, how we frame the issues. And framing this issue, if we get the nomenclature right, we can help to expand support for right to work by not using terms like union leadership or union leaders. Labor leaders is even worse. I mean, because they don't lead labor. They lead, small 6% of the private sector workforce. That's it. 94% of the American workers in the private sector are not unionized, don't associate with unions, and still get, believe it or not, they get paychecks, they get health benefits, they get pensions, they get all kinds of fun stuff that, wouldn't be possible according to union officials. So thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate the opportunity to be here with you this morning. I'll stick around for a minute if there's other questions.
Thank you so much, Mark. Fantastic presentation, very important topic. And as a thank you for speaking, I'd like to offer you the tie on my neck, an Adam Smith tie.
Thank you very much.
Of course.
Appreciate that.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it. Truly a treasure and a fantastic human. I encourage you to join us on December 6th for our next Wednesday Wakeup Club breakfast, and I encourage you to RSVP online at leadershipinstitute.org/breakfast. And Andrew Green, if he's in the building, right there, that tall man in a beautiful tie, some great suits, well-tailored. Love to see everything that's happening. He's an amazing man, and I invite anyone interested in a tour of the Stephen P.J. Wood building in the Emerson and Dolores Reinsch Center for Campus Reform to meet Andrew, fantastic gentleman, here, and he'll give you a great tour of the Leadership Institute, and we'll be happy to answer any questions you have. And if you can't answer a tough question you ask, we will contact Morton immediately, and he will ask Morton. So thank you all so much for being here. Have a fantastic Wednesday. This concludes the Wednesday Wake Club Breakfast. Thank you.